That phone call changed my life in a way I never saw coming. I was sitting on the balcony of our apartment in Queens, letting the cool evening air wash over me. The breeze was light, and the world felt so still and calm. In the distance, I could see the skyline of Manhattan glowing under the fading sunlight, creating a kind of wall between the constant city noise and this small, quiet corner where I found peace. I always loved these moments, when I could just be alone with my thoughts for a while and breathe. Ryan was working late again, as usual. We had fallen into a routine. He would come home late from the office, we would have dinner, talk about the usual everyday stuff, and then each of us would go our own way for the rest of the night. I had gotten used to it. I had no complaints. Marriage had turned out to be less complicated than I expected, but there were still times when I felt like something was missing. I usually blamed it on being tired. Everyone gets exhausted, right? That evening, I was thinking about maybe planning something nice for the weekend. A trip to Prospect Park, maybe? A picnic or something like that. It had been a while since Ryan and I did anything spontaneous, just the two of us, with no real purpose other than being together. We both worked so much, and free time had become this rare thing. Why not enjoy the sunny fall weather while it lasted? Then my phone rang, breaking the quiet. I jumped a little, pulled from my thoughts. "Hellos," I answered. "Sarah, it is me." The voice was hoarse and a little shaky, but I knew it right away. My dad. I frowned, trying to figure out why he was calling from a number I did not recognize. Our relationship had always been strained, to put it mildly. After I moved to New York, we rarely spoke. I had gotten used to him not calling.
"Dad,"
I said, my brow furrowing deeper. "What is going on? Why are you calling from a strange number?" "Yeah, it is me," he said, his tone hesitant like he was unsure how to start. I have something important to tell you." My mind started racing. What could it be? Money issues? Health problems? Dad was never the type to call just to chat, so if he was reaching out now, it had to be serious. "What is it?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Sarah, you have a brother." I froze. I could not even process what he had just said.
"What?"
"What do you mean?" "You have a brother," he repeated, and this time his voice sounded even more tense. "His name is Jacob. Your mom and I never told you, but he lives in Seattle." I could not wrap my head around what I was hearing. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath. Why would you keep something like this from me?" "It is a long story. I cannot explain everything right now, not over the phone," he said quickly. "But Jacob reached out to me recently. He wants to meet you." I gave him your number. You gave him my numbers?" I was barely keeping up with all of this. "Who is he? How could you never tell me about him?" I do not understand. "I know this is a lot to take in, Sarah, but he is your brother.
You two need to meet."
It is important." He fell silent again, leaving me gripping the phone, my mind spinning in 100 different directions. This was too much. How could this be real? How could they hide something like this from me all my life? "I do not get it," I finally said, my voice barely steady. "Why are you only telling me this now?" "Because he found me," my dad admitted, sounding almost defeated. "And he wants to meet you." I could not keep this a secret anymore. It is time. For the next few days, I walked around in a daze, trying to wrap my mind around that phone call. I went to work, I met up with friends, I even laughed at their jokes, but inside I could not stop thinking about Jacob.
Who was he?
What was he like? What had his life been like? And most of all, why had my parents kept his existence from me? Then, one night as I sat on the couch, staring at the quiet streets outside my window, my phone buzzed. I looked down and saw a message from an unknown number. "Hey Sarah, this is Jacob. Dad gave me your number.
I hope you do not mind me reaching out."
I have wanted to for a while. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the screen. I had no idea what to say. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a few seconds before I managed to type a response. "Hi Jacob. Yes, Dad just told me about you recently. It was unexpected, but I am glad you wrote." I hit send and waited, holding my breath as if the next thing he said would change everything. A few moments later, his reply came through. I know this is a shock. I have been thinking about how to approach this for a long time. I would like to meet you if you are open to it. I will be in New York for work in a couple of weeks. Maybe we could grab coffee? I read his message over and over again, trying to decide how I felt about it. Jacob seemed thoughtful, careful with his words. I could sense that he understood how overwhelming this was for me. After a long pause, I made my decision. This was something I could not run from, no matter how unsettling it felt. Okay, I replied. Let us meet when you are in town. Just let me know, and we can find a place in Manhattan. His response came quickly. That sounds perfect. I will message you as soon as I get there. Thank you, Sarah. After closing the message, I sat for a long time, staring out at the city lights. The thought of meeting a brother I had never known felt surreal, but there was no turning back now. I had to face this. A couple of weeks later, Jacob messaged me to let me know he had arrived in New York. We agreed to meet at a small cafe on a quiet street in Soho. It was the perfect neutral spot, somewhere neither of us would feel too out of place. As I walked there, my mind raced with questions. What was he like? Would we have anything in common? Would it feel like meeting a stranger or a long-lost part of myself? I got to the cafe a little early and paused outside the door, suddenly unsure if I was ready for this. But after a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. It was a cozy place, with wooden tables and soft lighting, the kind of setting that felt right for conversations that could turn your world upside down. I scanned the room, searching for a face I had never seen before, but somehow felt connected to. Then I spotted him. He was sitting by the window, glancing at the menu, his expression calm but with an underlying tension I recognized. He looked up and caught my gaze, offering a tentative smile. Sarah? He asked, standing up as I approached. That's me, I replied, trying to sound steady. We shook hands awkwardly, and it was strange, greeting someone who was my brother, yet a complete stranger. We sat down, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence felt heavy, like we were both unsure how to start. Finally, Jacob spoke. Thank you for meeting me. I know this is a lot, he said, his voice warm and sincere. Yeah, it is, I admitted, giving him a small smile. But we are family. I guess we have to start somewhere, right? He nodded, his smile growing a little wider. He had a resemblance to our dad, but there was something different about him, something lighter, more relaxed. We began with small talk, his work, the trip, what life was like in New York. He was surprisingly easy to talk to, and as the minutes passed, I felt myself relaxing, the tension fading bit by bit. But there was one question I could not avoid any longer. Why didn't I know about you? I asked, looking him directly in the eyes. Why did Dad and Mom keep you a secret? Jacob's expression shifted, growing more serious. He set the menu down and met my gaze, his eyes filled with a mix of understanding and regret. I did not know about you for a long time either, he admitted. They never told me. I only found out recently. When I did, I was as shocked as you are now. I think they thought it was easier that way. Easier to not bring up the past. Maybe they were afraid it would complicate things for everyone. I do not know all the details myself, but I believe they were trying to protect us both in some way. I am not saying it was the right thing to do, but I think their intentions were good. His honesty struck me, but it did not make it any easier to accept. So, what now? I asked quietly, trying to sort through the storm of emotions swirling in me. What are we supposed to do with all of this? I am not sure, Jacob admitted, his voice soft but firm. But I think we should try to build something, don't you? We are family, and no matter how strange this feels, that has to count for something. We ended up talking for hours. By the time we said goodbye, it felt easier than I had expected. There was a sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted. I realized that even though it was awkward and overwhelming, I was glad we had met. I am really glad we did this, Jacob said as we stepped out of the cafe, the cool night air washing over us. Me too, I said, and I meant it. The days that followed were strange. I could not stop thinking about Jacob, about our meeting. He had slipped into my life so easily, as if he had always been there. It was unsettling, but also comforting. I was not sure how to feel about it all. I found myself thinking about him constantly, even when I was with Ryan. Like one night, we were sitting on the couch, watching TV, and I realized I had not heard a word he said in the last 10 minutes. My mind had drifted to Jacob, to the lake house he mentioned he had grown up near. The life he had lived without me. Sarah, are you even listening? Ryan's voice broke through my thoughts, and I blinked, turning to him. Sorry, I mumbled, realizing I had missed the entire conversation. You've been distracted a lot lately, he said, his brow furrowed. Is everything okay? You seem distant. Yeah, everything is fine, I lied, not meeting his eyes. Just a lot going on at work. The lie sat heavy between us. Ryan had always been my rock, but lately, I had felt this distance growing between us, like we were living in parallel lives that never quite touched. And now, with Jacob in the picture, I did not know how to bridge that gap. Maybe we should spend more time together, Ryan suggested, his voice softening. He was trying to reach out, trying to pull me back in. Maybe, I agreed, though deep down, I knew that more time together would not fix this. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than just needing a date night or a weekend away. Every night, I lay in bed next to Ryan, thinking about how I could tell him about Jacob. But every time I opened my mouth, I stopped. What would I even say? How could I explain that this man I had just met, my brother, was suddenly consuming my thoughts, changing everything I thought I knew about my life? The storm inside me was growing, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it broke. A few days later, I got a call from Jacob. Seeing his name flash on the screen made my heart race, a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. He had become a part of my life so quickly, and it was starting to scare me how much I wanted to hear from him. Hey, Sarah, Jacob said when I picked up. His voice was as warm and familiar as ever. I've been thinking we had a good talk at the cafe, but I feel like we need more time to really get to know each other. I hesitated, sensing something important was about to come. Yeah, I've been thinking about that too, I admitted. I've been planning to spend a weekend at a lake house in Michigan, he said, almost casually. It's quiet, peaceful, the perfect place to relax and talk. I wanted to invite you. What do you think? My heart skipped a beat. A lake house? A weekend away with Jacob? It sounded so appealing, and yet a little too much. We had just met after all. I barely knew him, but something inside me was pushing me to say yes. I don't know, Jacob. That sounds sudden, I said, trying to sound reasonable. It's all so new. And then there's Ryan. I get it, he replied gently. But Sarah, this is a good chance for us. In New York, we are both distracted. Your life, my work. But out there, at the lake, we can talk. No distractions. No pressure.
Just think about it.
He was right. The idea of getting away, just the two of us, no distractions, sounded exactly like what I needed. But what would I tell Ryan? We hardly ever spent time apart, and he would immediately sense something was wrong. All right, I found myself saying before I could think twice. I'll go. Great. Jacob's excitement was clear through the phone. I'll pick you up Friday morning. Get ready for a weekend you will never forget. After the call, I sat there in silence. A strange sense of relief washed over me, like I had made a decision that had been weighing on me for a long time. But with that relief came a flood of doubt. What was I going to tell Ryan? I still had not figured that out, and deep down I knew I was stepping onto shaky ground. Later that evening, as we sat down for dinner, Ryan asked, "How was your day?" "Fine," I said quickly, focusing on my plate. We were having pasta, usually our favorite dinner to unwind with, but tonight it felt like I could barely swallow. "You sure?" he asked, his eyes studying me. "You seem a little off." "Just tired," I lied again. "By the way, I have a work trip this week." "A work trip?" He sounded surprised. "Where to?" "Chicago," I blurted out, my stomach twisting. "Just for a few days." Ryan nodded, but I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He did not press me, though. That should have been a relief, but it only made the guilt inside me grow. That night, lying in bed, I stared up at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my lie pressing down on me. I had lied to the man I loved to meet, a brother I barely knew. I knew that nothing would be the same after this weekend, but I had no idea what it would mean for me, for us. Friday morning came, and Jacob arrived right on time. We drove out of the city, the noise of New York fading behind us as the landscape slowly changed into green hills and open fields. I watched the world pass by outside the window, my thoughts racing. Jacob seemed calm, at ease behind the wheel, while I was battling a storm of emotions. "You're going to love it there," Jacob said after a long silence. "It's nothing like New York. You have earned this break." "I really do need it," I admitted, trying to let myself relax. As we got closer, the scenery became more beautiful, more peaceful. Finally, we pulled up to the lake house, a charming old cottage with large windows overlooking the water. It was surrounded by trees, with the lake shimmering in the distance. It looked like something out of a painting, calm, serene, untouched. "Wow," I whispered as I stepped out of the car, taking in the view. "I knew you would like it," Jacob said, smiling as he grabbed our bags. "Come on, let me show you inside." The house was just as cozy inside as it was outside. Wooden floors, a fireplace, and big open windows that gave us a perfect view of the lake. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the tension of the last few weeks start to melt away. Jacob and I spent the day walking around the property, talking about everything and nothing. Our conversations started light, work, life in the city, but slowly, we began to talk about deeper things. He told me about his childhood, how he grew up with our grandparents, and how he had only learned about our dad later in life. "I always felt like something was missing," he said quietly as we sat by the lake, skipping stones across the water. "When I found out about you, it was like finding the missing piece of the puzzle. I searched for you for a long time, Sarah." His words hit me harder than I expected. I sat there, staring out at the lake, trying to process everything. Jacob had not just appeared out of nowhere. He had been looking for me. He had wanted to find me, to know me. That realization made me feel something I could not quite name, a bond that was both new and deeply familiar. "I'm glad you found me," I said after a long pause, offering him a small smile. "It still feels surreal, but I'm glad." Jacob looked over at me, and then he reached out and took my hand. His touch was warm, and in that moment, I felt a strange tension between us. It was not uncomfortable, but it was there, lingering. We sat like that for a long time, watching the sunset over the lake. It was peaceful, and yet, I could not shake the feeling that my life was about to change in ways I was not prepared for. As the evening fell, we headed back to the house and cooked dinner together. Jacob lit a fire in the fireplace, and we sat out on the terrace afterward, wrapped in the quiet of the night. The stars were bright, the air crisp and cool. It was the kind of night that felt perfect, almost too perfect. We sat in silence for a while, just enjoying the stillness. And then, without warning, Jacob leaned in and kissed me. I did not pull away. I knew it was coming, somewhere deep down. I knew, but I still felt a swirl of emotions, guilt, confusion, and something else, something I was not ready to name. This connection I had with Jacob, it had become something I could not ignore, but I did not know how to explain it to myself, let alone to Ryan. Jacob looked at me after the kiss, his expression soft, almost tender. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer afraid of whatever was happening between us. I had found a connection with him, a bond that was stronger than I had imagined. It was confusing, but it was real. We stayed up late that night, talking about everything that had led us to this point. There was no going back now. Jacob was not just some stranger anymore. He was part of my life, and I could not deny that. But the weight of what that meant for my life with Ryan was heavy on my mind. The weekend at the lake house passed in a blur of deep conversations and quiet moments. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe, like the constant noise in my head had finally quieted. But as much as I wanted to stay in that bubble with Jacob, I knew that once we returned to New York, everything would change. When we drove back into the city, the reality of what I had done hit me harder than I expected. The peaceful feeling I had experienced at the lake began to fade, replaced by the anxiety of what was waiting for me at home. I knew I could not keep hiding what had happened. The lies, the secrets, it was all about to come crashing down. When I walked into the apartment, Ryan was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in his hand. He did not even look up when I came in. There was a coldness in the air between us, something I had never felt before. "You're back," he said quietly, not looking at me. "How was the trip?" My heart pounded in my chest. I could hear the tension in his voice, the hurt that he was trying to keep in check. "It was fine," I said, though my voice wavered. I could feel the lie hanging between us, thick and heavy. Ryan stood up and walked over to me, stopping just a few feet away. The space between us felt like a canyon. He looked at me with an intensity that made my stomach twist. "Megan," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I know you were not on a business trip." I froze. He knew. Of course he knew. "I have known for a while that something has been off," he continued. "So, what is going on? What are you not telling me?" I could not avoid it any longer. I had to tell him the truth. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts, but the words felt jumbled in my throat. "There is something I have not told you," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. I found out I have a brother. His name is Jacob. I did not know about him until recently." Ryan's face went pale with shock.
He had not expected that.
"A brother," he repeated, stepping back. "You never mentioned anything about a brother." "I did not know," I said quickly. "My dad told me a few weeks ago. It was a shock for me too, Ryan, but I met him and we went to Michigan to spend some time together." Ryan stared at me, his fists clenched at his sides. I could see the hurt and confusion in his eyes. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked, his voice rising with frustration. "Why would you hide something like this from me?" "I was scared," I admitted. "I did not know how to explain it, and everything happened so fast. I was trying to figure it out for myself." "You were scared?" Ryan's voice cracked, his pain evident now. "So, instead of telling me, you lied? You lied about where you were going, about what you were doing. You went off with some guy you just met, and I am supposed to be okay with that." "Jacob is not just some guy," I whispered.
He is my brother, Ryan.
I needed to get to know him. "And what about us?" Ryan's voice was raw now, filled with emotion. "What about our life, Sarah? Does that not matter anymore?" I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. I did not have the words to explain what I was feeling. Everything had changed so quickly. The connection I had with Jacob, it had shifted something inside me, and I could not go back to the way things were before. But how could I explain that to Ryan? "You are different, Sarah," Ryan said after a long silence. "You are not the same person I married. It feels like everything is falling apart, and I do not even know who you are anymore." "I am sorry," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "I never meant to hurt you." Ryan shook his head, his jaw tight. "I need time to think," he said, his voice cold. "I cannot deal with this right now." He grabbed his coat and walked toward the door. I wanted to stop him, to say something that would make it better, but the words would not come. He left without another word, leaving me alone in the silence of the apartment. I sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of everything crashing down around me. The life I had been trying so hard to hold on to was slipping away, and I did not know how to stop it. Days passed, and Ryan did not come back. His absence was like a physical pain, a reminder of everything I had lost. I tried to focus on work, on the day-to-day routine, but my mind kept circling back to Jacob, to Ryan, to everything that had changed. One evening, unable to stand the quiet any longer, I called Jacob. He answered on the first ring. "Sarah, are you okay?" His voice was filled with concern. "No, Jacob," I said, my voice shaky. "I am not okay. I told Ryan about you, about us, and he left." "I am so sorry, Sarah," Jacob said softly. "I never wanted to cause problems for you." "It is not your fault," I sighed. "This was already coming. You made me realize things I was not ready to face." "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I think I need to move out," I said quietly. "There is nothing left for me here. If you need a place to stay, you are always welcome here," Jacob offered. "I have a spare room. You can come to Chicago." "Thank you," I said, feeling a wave of gratitude. "I might take you up on that. I just need some time to figure things out." Jacob's support became my lifeline over the next few weeks. I began packing up my things, each box a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. It was hard to say goodbye, but I knew it was time. When I left the apartment for the last time, there was an unexpected sense of relief. Yes, it was the end of something significant, but it was also the beginning of something new. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a sense of purpose. Jacob met me at his place in Chicago, and from the moment I arrived, I knew I had made the right choice. His home was warm and inviting, and we settled into an easy routine. It felt natural, as though this new life had been waiting for me all along.